All right, everyone, welcome. Today we're going to step inside the cognitive psychology lab and deconstruct a really classic experiment. We're going to break down how researchers can study one of the most basic things your brain does, sorting and categorizing, well, everything. So, here's our game plan. We'll start with this cool idea of the brain as a giant filing cabinet. Then, we'll dig into two key concepts, prototypes versus exemplars. After that, we'll build a real, testable hypothesis, design the experiment to see if it's true, and then predict what the results would actually tell us about how our minds work. Okay, first up, the brain's filing cabinet. Think about it. Every single day, you're just bombarded with a ton of information. So how does your brain handle all that without, completely crashing? Well, it organizes. It creates these little mental folders to make sense of the world. And that's exactly where our investigation starts. Now, in psychology, the technical term for this whole mental filing system is a schema. Really, just think of it like a mental blueprint. The second you see a furry, four-legged animal that barks, your dog schema just fires up and it tells you everything you need to know. It's a shortcut, and it lets us move through the world without having to analyze every single little thing from scratch. So we know the brain uses these schemas, right? But the next big question is, how are these mental categories actually built? This gets to a really interesting debate. Do we create some kind of abstract, perfect example in our heads, or do we just store a bunch of individual memories? Psychologists have two main theories for this, the idea of a prototype versus a collection of exemplars. Let's really break that down.
So a prototype, that's your abstract ideal average. It's the image that pops into your head when I say bird. For most people, it's something kind of like a robin. This theory basically says your brain is a rule maker, averaging out all your experiences to build one perfect model. On the other hand, an exemplar is a concrete, specific example you've actually seen, like that penguin you saw at the zoo. This theory suggests our brain is more like a huge library, storing countless individual memories and then comparing new things to those. So the question becomes, which system is our brain using to be fast?
And this leads us right to the scientific question. I mean, it's great to have these cool theories, but how can we actually test if our brains are using these abstract prototypes to categorize things really, really quickly? This is where a clever experiment comes in. We need a way to measure this totally invisible mental process. Okay, so here is the formal hypothesis we're testing. I know, it sounds a little dense, a little academic, but this is what makes it a super precise and testable prediction. The core idea here is that there's a direct link between how typical something is and how fast our brain can shove it into the right mental folder. So let's just translate that into plain English. All this is really saying is that the more robin-like a bird is, the faster you'll recognize it as a bird. And the less typical it is, like, say, a penguin, the longer it takes your brain to go, ah, yes, that also belongs in the bird category. Simple, right?
So, how in the world do we test this speed sorting idea? All right, let's put on our imaginary lab coats for a minute. We're going to design an experiment that can actually measure these tiny split-second mental calculations, and we're going to do it with some surprisingly simple tools.
And get this, look at how simple the setup is. There are no fancy fMRI machines, no complex computers. We're just talking about a stack of word cards, a stopwatch, a little screen to block the view, and a notebook to write stuff down. It's a perfect example of how a really elegant experiment can uncover deep truths with just the basics.
So here's what you do if you're the participant. First, you get a stack of 16 cards with words on them. Second, you're told to sort them into whatever groups make sense to you. But, and this is the key, step 3 is that you have to do it as fast as you possibly can. And finally, you do this whole thing 4 times with 4 different sets of cards. That speed component is what we're really measuring. And here is the secret sauce, the really clever part of the experiment. The participants have no idea, but the card sets are totally rigged. Some of the sets are packed with those super typical prototypes, words like apple for fruit or robin for birds. But the other sets are filled with the weird ones, the less typical examples like olive for fruit or penguin for birds.
Now, we don't have the actual data right here, but that's what's so cool about the scientific method. Based on our hypothesis, we can predict exactly what the results should look like if our theory is on the right track. So let's play researcher for a second and figure out what we'd expect to see.
This is basically the researcher's scorecard. For each of those 4 rounds of card sorting, they'd be carefully writing down 2 things: the time it took the person to sort them and the number of errors they made, times they put a card in a weird category.
So, let's connect this back to our prediction. If our hypothesis is correct, what should we see on that scorecard? We should see that the times are lowest and the errors are fewest for the card sets filled with robin and apple. The sorting will be faster, with fewer mistakes, because those items are just so much closer to our mental prototype.
And then comes the moment of truth. After you've collected all the data, all the times and errors, you make the final call. Does the evidence actually support your prediction? This one simple sentence is the entire reason you did the experiment in the first place, to see if your idea about the mind actually holds up.
So let's zoom out. The really crucial point here is that we're not just timing how fast someone can sort cards, we are using that speed as a window into the mind. It's a physical, measurable thing that gives us clues about the invisible, abstract way that you organize all of your knowledge. It's like we're drawing a map of the mind's filing system.
And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. This experiment shows us one really powerful mental shortcut, but our brains are absolutely full of them. They help us decide, judge, and act in a split second. So the real question is, what other cognitive shortcuts are running in the background of your mind right now, shaping your reality without you even noticing?